I just trying to figure out what I should share. And I realized that I have just about 4 points. I'm also conscious that we are to talk about the way forward. And therefore, it becomes absolutely necessary to understand the dominant historical trajectory that is there that we are going through. Taking off from the morning session, on the global scenario, we say that the United Nations system is not working as one expected few decades ago. So too is the multilateral agencies. WTO talking about reforms. These international agencies are also being influenced or dominated externally by the corporate sector, the big business. From these multilateral agencies being a proxy to the corporate agencies, the amalgamation of the corporate, of the global capital with these multilateral agencies is now to be legitimized by opening up to the corporates. This is what was told in the morning. We need to also recognize that India is a late entrant in the big club. So many of the posturings of India taking an independent pro-national position, I guess, is basically to leverage the Indian corporates on a similar plane as the other global multinational. I think we should not misinterpret as a very nationalistic kind of thing. This is my first point. The second is we need to look at the national context. What is the kind of, from a governance perspective, because that is where we need to embed the Forest Rights Act. So from a governance perspective, we have certain notions of democracy simplified into electoral democracy, not recognizing that our governance system is essentially a combination of feudal and colonial, both in the social structure as well as in the administrative structure. Despite the popular narrative and the myth that our elected government actually governs, we have inherited a colonial governance system. The only link that we used to have with electoral democracy is at the state and the national level, at the level of minister, nothing below. And that we thought was convenient because the structure already existed pre-independence. And therefore we moved on to thinking about creating newer institutional mechanisms of democracy and integrating the colonial administration into it. And that's how came the 73rd and 74th Amendment. To give an example of 73rd Amendment, we do have, the Ministry of Panchayat Raj has the data which says that only up to 49% of what is there in the 73rd Amendment was actually incorporated into the state laws, and that in practice, it was just 16%. Instead of the Panchayat Raj system taking control of the administration took control over the Panchayat system. We still think Panchayat Raj is a symbol of democracy. You look at the 74th Amendment, you have an exemption clause which says that in regions which are notified as industrial township, you don't even need to have elections for local government. So you have corporates running government, of course, followed by the special Economic Zone SEZ Act in 2005, which also follows a similar kind of a notion of a corporate statehood. We have no problems. We have no disagreements with the loss of right to vote. This, this kind of a colonial an administrative system and this social structure and system, it permeates everything, every institutions that society has. That very surprisingly, probably not surprising, it's very natural, that we are still unable to think outside the feudal colonial framework. And that is why we probably missed, or entirely missed in 2010, the 3 constitutional amendments which the Ministry of Panchayat Raj had proposed and sent to all the states, totally radically revamping the whole administrative structure. Now, where does Forest Rights, I'm coming to the third point, where does Forest Rights Act come in? If you look at forest legislation, you have the colonial legislation, Indian Forest Act 1927, on which you have the Wildlife Protection Act built upon it, and you have the Forest Conservation Act, which has got nothing to do with conservation. It's to do with the just opposite. And now you have also the Environmental Protection Act 1980 with this eco-sensitive zone, all overlapping with each other. All on the same colonial framework, which empowers the administration, the bureaucracy, with no accountability or links to the institutions of democracy. Forest Rights Act do not fall or come or has emerged from this stream. It has come from another stream. What is this stream? That stream has a long history. It starts off during the feudal era, where there is this set of people who refused to be assimilated into the feudal caste order, who kept to themselves, maybe at the periphery, maybe oppressed. And it was during the colonial period that the region began to be colonized, which they resisted. And as a result of it, the number of legislations were enacted, basically to recognize that these people can govern themselves. Again, imagine that they have not created a feudal structure within them, nor they were assimilated into the external feudal structures. They had a different kind of system. There are many examples. I'm not going to go through all those things. You have, the Wilkinson rules in Chaibasa 1837, Scheduled District Act 1874, Santal Parganas Act, Chota Nagpur Tenancy Act, the Government of India Act 1935, the Inner Line Permit, and a whole host of things. You have a history. Now you come to the Constitution and you have the 5th Schedule and the 6th Schedule. Many of these ideas were incorporated, or at least the legal space was created, but not necessarily the details. And then you move on further. After the 73rd Amendment, you had the 1996 Panchayat Extension to Scheduled Areas Act. Probably the first decent law that ought to be in a democracy. Never matter that it took 15 years for them to start notifying the rules, and still 2 states are yet to notify. Doesn't matter that the provisions of the law passed by the Parliament is not incorporated into the state law. But what is important is to understand the political history of what the people aspire for and how it got legitimized in law, and how laws are used politically to take it forward. Forest Rights Act follows that stream. So you look at this situation. The 6th Schedule area, about 1.7% of the total land area, and maybe about 0.6% of the total Indian population. You have the 5th Schedule area, about 11.3% geographical area. and maybe about 5.6% of the total population. I'm not talking about scheduled tribes alone. I'm just talking about the general population. And then you have the Forest Rights Act, which in 2009 the Ministry of Environment made a calculation, and they said that 40 million hectares in 2009, 40 million hectares of forest land have to be transferred to the village level institutions, and the existing forest laws have to be amended. And 40 million hectares is more about 56% of the total of India's forests, of which maybe about 10% is already recognized, which probably we might crib and say that, look at our potential, nothing is happening, but you must also recognize that this is the biggest land tenure recognition experience in contemporary history anywhere in the world. And then you look at things, you take, say, for example, the first state outside of the 10 central Indian states that put up a proposal for scheduled area is the state of Kerala in 2015. About more than 2,300 odd villages, 2 gram panchayats and 2 wards were to be stuck in Delhi. Or for that matter, just the last week you have the Ladakh people asking for the 6th schedule demand. Or for that matter, you look at about 10 or so autonomous district councils that were created under the state laws in the Northeast, and not under the 6th schedule. Of course, it's very confusing because you have an autonomous district council, state, panchayat raj, traditional village, all conflicting with each other. That's a different matter. But what I'm basically trying to say is that there is a stream of thing which has progressively moved, at least in law and in politics, to define, broaden, and extend. And Forest Rights Act is the latest one. The notion of democracy, articulation of a democracy in a different manner. And in 2010, the Ministry of Panchayat Raj, all that it did was a very simple thing. They looked around and they said that the best democracy and democratic governance structure is what the tribals have fought and got. So let's combine the 5th schedule and the 6th schedule and make it the whole of the country. I'm sure you won't even find a single article anywhere written, for the simple reason that, the mainstream thinks, all these are related to tribals, nothing to do with democracy. The tribals also think that it's related to tribals and therefore nothing to do with the rest of the world. Now what we need to do is to think about, that this is a history that has folded. I'm not giving any interpretation or analysis. I'm saying these are the factual history that has unfolded. Now, back to Forest Rights Act, this is my last point. What is happening? Nothing. It's being targeted and it's being trampled. And who is doing it? State governments are doing it, the central government is doing it, the Supreme Court is doing it, all the judiciary is doing it. You look at the Wildlife Protection Act. Every provision in Wildlife Protection Act has been violated in all the 53 tiger reserves that we have. It's not a problem. After all, it's for tigers. Violating laws for tigers is okay. Then you have the Forest Conservation Act. At least more than 2 lakh hectares of forest land have been diverted for non-forestry purposes and for compensatory afforestation since 2009. That is the period from which Forest Rights Act has been implemented. And I'm sure that none of this diversion has fulfilled the provisions in Forest Conservation Act. Forget about Forest Rights Act. That is the provisions in Forest Conservation Act which is supposed to be a compliance for Forest Rights Act. There's no issue. It's not a political issue. Now you have then you have the eco-sensitive zone notification. That's about 1,11,000 square kilometers have been notified. That is the notified and the proposed ones. Now there are many which are not proposed, which the Supreme Court had subsequently said up to 10 kilometers you have to take a radius and size it up. Okay, you have the Environmental Protection Act, the notification, the guideline which ignores all institutions of democracy. Fine. Then you have the 3rd June 2022 Supreme Court order which even ignores everybody and puts the whole power into the hands of the police and the forest. That is the PCCF and the Home Secretary. I'm not going into the details of what other things the Supreme Court said. You have judicial high court orders. Yeah, high court orders, for instance, there is a high court order which says that there's a total ban on grazing in forest area. It's a part of the right of the under Forest Rights Act, which has now been modified, applicable only to the protected areas. There is a ban on development projects under Section 3(2) in forest areas, which the Supreme Court has now reduced to that, okay, only in protected areas this ban is applicable. Many forest land have been diverted, and when it was pointed out that the laws have not been followed, the Supreme Court was happy to say that these projects are of national importance and of border defense, etc., etc. So you take the forest and you do whatever you want, and we'll talk about law after that. Now this is the overall kind of a picture that we have. What we need to think about is that, do we learn lessons from the people? Thank you.